My neighbour is currently cutting their grass, so if that annoys you, I do apologise.
She's very loud for such a small person.
Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back to Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a new true crime case, and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. If you like all things true crime news, then please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. You can now tune in over on Spotify, so please make sure to support the channel with a big juicy 5-star review. I will leave a small disclaimer, this case does involve details of child abuse, violent crime and malicious misgendering. If that's the trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. And remember, if you've nothing nice to say,
I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
Hi gremlins! Let's take a journey through time back to 1850 and imagine you're going for a peaceful hike amongst the Spanish countryside. The sun begins to set behind the hills and everywhere you turn you're surrounded by nature. Nothing but miles and miles of green. Taking a minute to catch your breath, you stop and take a sip of water from your canteen, only to notice that you've lost sight of your travel guide. He was literally right behind you just a second ago. You call out his name, but all you hear is the sound of your own voice reverberating back at you. You're quickly losing daylight and the round full moon is already visible through the trees. An owl hoots from a branch overhead, causing you to drop your water bottle. It's in that moment that you realise you're completely alone in the middle of the woods. Between the balmy temperature and your elevated heart rate, you start to overheat. You can feel beads of sweat trickle down your neck and pull at the base of your spine. Completely reliant on your other senses, you listen close for any sound of movement, and for a while, it's silent. No birds, no voices, just the wind gently whistling. However, in an instant, a deep guttural growl interrupts your peace. You strain your eyes, but it's no use. There's nothing in front of you but pitch black night. Limbs frozen and unable to run, you search for the nearest tree with your hands and slide down to sit on the thick moss below. Tucking your knees to your chest, you say a silent prayer, hoping that you can will this wild beast away. It's wishful thinking, but it's all that you've got right now. Many thoughts flood your mind. How did this happen? And where did Manuel go? Had this beast gotten to him already? You wait, holding your breath as much as you can, terrified that you'll mess up and expose your hiding spot. Thankfully, you hear nothing, just the sound of your own blood pumping through your veins. After what feels like hours slumped in the same position, your shoulders finally begin to loosen, and doing your best to get comfortable, you shift your left leg out from underneath you. And that's when it comes from behind, a hot, breathy, wet snarl blowing past your ear. Thinking fast, you scramble for the dirt with your fingers. Crawling at first, you attempt to steady yourself enough to transition into a sprint, but something heavy smacks you in the windpipe and you're thrown back. Winded and disorientated, you look up at the night sky and you see that it's now raining. With each cool droplet, you're able to regain control of your senses. And that's when you lock eyes with it. This monster has the thick black matted fur of a wild boar and the face of a rabid dog, but it's standing on 2 legs like a man. As the dark creature raises its arm, 5 razor-sharp talons glimmer in the moonlight. It exudes a familiar stench, the kind of smell your pet Labrador gives off after a long walk in the rain. And that's when you realise just where you've seen this thing before. In an old fairy tale book your grandmother once read you to sleep with. The large demon brings his claws down onto your skin, and with that, you slowly start to drift away. But as you do, you think to yourself, this can't be, because werewolves aren't real. Or are they? Tonight, everyone, for part 3 in our History Mystery series, we will be discussing the Wolfman murders. Whatever you believe in, there's no denying that lycanthropy has long been a popular topic explored within film, television, art, literature, and ancient text. Way before Lon Chaney played the infamous hairy monster back in 1941, the legend of man transitioning into wolf was one born from many cultures and time periods. In Greek mythology, Lycan, son of Pelasgus and the king of Arcadia, attempted to trick Zeus into eating the flesh of his own son, Nyctimus. He did it in order to see if the god of thunder was really as powerful and as all-knowing as he claimed, and in a sense, he got his answer. Zeus realised what Lycan had done, and in a rage, he cursed him to live on as a wolf. It's definitely an interesting and entertaining wee story. But is that all it is? Hundreds of different clans, religious groups and tribes believe that for centuries the wolf has represented half of the human psyche, and in many novels and movies it's used as a representation of the beast that lies within us all. In certain native and indigenous tribes, the wolf symbolises the protector, the hunter, a creature who deserves respect and admiration. Whilst most consider the discussion of werewolves to be merely representational, others feel very strongly about the topic and even consider the existence of the Wolfman as fact. For example, within the Native American Navajo culture, there's chat of a shape-shifting being so deadly and monstrous that they dare not speak its name out loud. Those who follow the Navajo traditions and religious practices believe that walking among us are creatures that not only possess the power to transform into wolves, but other vicious animals. Now, as someone who's neurotically superstitious, I won't be risking it for a biscuit by calling out these things by name. However, I will refer to them by using their popular pseudonym, Flesh Pedestrians. According to the very little we know about Navajo lore, flesh pedestrians were once linked to those who practiced dark magics and used potions and medicines to inflict harm and misfortune. In modern times, however, it is said that should any woman, man or child commit a truly wicked act upon another human being, that the beast within will emerge, bringing with it a malevolent curse. These legends are rarely discussed with others living on the outside, and understandably, the Navajo community are extremely tight-lipped when it comes to their spiritual beliefs. Many tales that originated from Native American folklore have since been snatched and given a Hollywood facelift for financial gain. So, to avoid this kind of appropriation and exploitation in the future, most have chosen to stay silent when questioned by those not in the fold. However, in a strange twist of fate, the ambiguity surrounding flesh pedestrians and their true origins has only made us Westerners even more curious. Are they the same creatures we know as werewolves, or an entirely different species altogether? Images that have been gathered over generations show that indeed the modern werewolf does share a lot of physical similarities to the Navajo FP. But it still doesn't answer the question of whether this half man, half something else entirely is real or just an amalgamation of many different bedtime stories. I'm sure if you're a true crime content or horror enthusiast, you'll have witnessed the thousands of creators on TikTok and YouTube claiming to have had their own personal run-in with the dreaded flesh pedestrians. You may have also noticed that several first-hand accounts from residents of the Appalachian Mountains have been going viral recently on social media. According to many who are bravely living and working in the haunted hills, their everyday lives have been plagued by many mythical entities such as mimics, FPs, and the terrifying wolf-like duo. Hunters, campers and travellers alike have claimed that the dense forests have become the perfect hunting ground for this large, shaggy mammal with razor-sharp claws and eyes glowing red. Some even display their own grainy night vision footage as proof of the supernatural. Are these videos just for clout? Or should we be looking over our shoulders for potential shape-shifting predators? If none of these reports have you questioning the existence of the demonic four-legged fiend, then maybe tonight's case will. It all began when, after a very traumatic labour, Manuel Blanco Roma Santo was born to his parents Miguel and Maria on November 8, 1809. Raised in the small town of Oregiro within the province of Orense, Spain, Manuel enjoyed a privileged upbringing. Unlike many other children his age, he was offered proper schooling and was able to both read and write. However, all was not as it seemed, and in reality, Manuel grew up as an outcast, and even his own flesh and blood treated him as such. You see, when doctors first laid eyes on his tiny body back in 1809, they noted that something just wasn't right. The baby suffered from some physical abnormalities, and after much deliberation, both the medical staff and Manuel's parents decided that he would be raised as a female child. For the first 6 years of his life, a young Manuel was taught how to dance, sing, and sew, all of the skills a girl from that time would need to thrive within society. But at the age of 6, things changed, and it became clear that the little girl, once named Manuela, had started to grow a penis. Despite being an assigned female at birth, the youngster suffered from an intersex condition, which meant he was born with both female and male reproductive organs and genitalia. Without taking a moment to consider what this transition would mean for a very confused Manuel, he was told that he was now a boy and to act accordingly. Overnight, his entire world was turned upside down. His dresses were removed from the home and replaced with trousers and shirts. He was forced to stop doing all of the things that had once brought him joy because in his parents' mind they weren't appropriate for a little boy. Understandably, Manuel struggled with all of these changes and was constantly trying to live up to his parents' unrealistic expectations. He was bullied by the local kids for being too feminine, and the girls he used to play dolls with would now call him a freak. This poor 6-year-old child was facing rejection from all angles, and he couldn't quite wrap his head around why. Now, of course, we can still feel sympathy for this version of Manuel, whilst despising him for the despicable choices he made as a grown adult. But as much as he's responsible for his later actions, we can probably all agree that his parents played a huge part in creating the monster he would soon become. His whole life, Manuel was ostracised from female friendship groups and mocked for his petite frame and small stature by other men. At a height of around 4'8", He felt like he didn't quite fit in, no matter how hard he tried. Even to his own parents, he served as the family's source of deep shame, a constant reminder of the perfect child that never was. Spending most of his free time alone, Manuel buried his head in hobbies that had once brought him peace, like sewing. He became a successful tailor and even met a nice woman in the 1830s, and the two were later married. However, just as things appeared to be finally falling into place, in 1833 his life would once again be torn apart when Manuel's wife passed away unexpectedly. Many in the village had claimed that the young man born in the wrong sex was cursed, and after his most recent loss, Manuel also started to believe this wholeheartedly. In a strange turn of events, he left his home with the intention of working as a travelling salesman throughout Spain and Portugal. However, in 1844, it would seem as though his demons had finally caught up to him. At the age of 34, Manuel got himself into debt, and when police constable Vicente Fernandez came to collect the 600 reales that he owed, he did something that would soon send shockwaves through the local community and leave one man dead and the other on the run. Now, this wasn't just pocket change by any means. In fact, today 600 reales would be the equivalent of 15,000 Great British pounds. Manuel either wasn't willing or able to pay off his debts and instead decided to murder Vicente. Shortly after the killing, Manuel fled using a fake passport and fictitious name. Because he remained safely tucked away in the Spanish countryside, he was only charged for the murder in absentia. The 10-year sentence that was handed down was enough to keep Manuel motivated, and he never stopped in one place for too long. He lived a very nomadic lifestyle during this time, and whilst on the run, he found solace again in old pastimes like crafting, tailoring and cooking. Whilst these skills allowed him to keep a roof over his head and stomach full, the men who lived locally had a lot to say about the tiny man and how he chose to spend his days. In a world oozing with toxic masculinity, Manuel found himself the victim of cruel jibes and bullying. The embarrassment he felt as a result of that forced him to give up the hobbies he really enjoyed in pursuit of a job as a travel guide. One thing you could say about Manuel is that according to reports, he had a very unintimidating vibe. He was shorter than most women, and his perceived feminine nature made him a popular choice among Spanish and Portuguese female travellers. The 19th century was a dangerous time to be trekking across northern Spain without a male escort. On the surface, he was a kind-hearted, creative person, but unbeknownst to everyone else, he was harbouring a dark passenger, one who was thirsty for blood. No one knew who the real Manuel Blanco Roma Santa was. They didn't even know his real name. According to them, he was Antonio Gomez, a native of Portugal. Over the next few years, people slowly started to notice something suspicious about both Manuel and the service he provided. Was he a great travel guide? Well, yes, but he had a nasty habit of losing his clients. Women and children would follow Manuel into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Initially, the disappearances went unreported and life went on as normal. That was until 2 turned into 4, then 6, then 8, and pretty soon locals started suspecting foul play. In the September of 1852, an official complaint was raised with the city of Escalona after rumours that a tour guide was kidnapping people and turning their body fat into bars of soap started to spread throughout the community. Upon further investigation, it was revealed that 4 women, 4 children and 1 man had gone missing after hiring Manuel. Authorities did wonder why no one had come looking for any of them, but when they reached out to the victims' families, they discovered that Roma Santa wasn't the mild-mannered nomad that everyone thought he was. Shortly after he returned from each journey, the loved ones of the absent travellers received letters stating that they had arrived at their destination safely. But sadly, this was all a lie, and each note was a complete fabrication cooked up by Manuel in order to cover his tracks. You see, as everyone would come to find out, Manuel was a dangerous animal, one that would stop at nothing to fulfill his dark compulsions. Originally, he was arrested and charged with the murders of 13 people, to which he made a full confession. Those investigating his crimes probably assumed that this would be an open and shut case. But when the time came for Manuel to give his confession, no one was prepared for what came out of his mouth. Sitting in prison, he admitted that yes, he'd been responsible for the mysterious disappearances, but that he couldn't be blamed for the murders because he had been in his werewolf form at the time. No, don't worry, you didn't mishear. Manuel claimed that he was a straight-up Wolfman. He told authorities that he'd been inflicted with this supernatural curse 13 years prior, stating, "The first time I transformed was in the mountains of Koso. I came across 2 ferocious-looking wolves. I suddenly fell to the floor and began to feel convulsions. I rolled over 3 times, and a few seconds later, I myself was a wolf." During his trial, he was of course asked to prove his lycanthropy by transforming right there in the court. He said that as much as he would love to, he couldn't, because the curse actually only lasts for 13 years and conveniently it had ended just days before. Of course, no one believed his outlandish tales, and in the October of 1852, several physicians from Ayari addressed the courts with their findings. His inclination to vice is voluntary and not forced. The subject is not insane, dim-witted or monomaniacal, nor were these conditions achieved whilst incarcerated. On the contrary, he, Roma Santa, instead turns out to be a pervert, an accomplished criminal capable of anything, cool and collected and without goodness, but acts with free will, freedom and knowledge. So, was Manuel really a werewolf? Probably not. But there were some strange details in this case that would leave the superstitious mind wondering. When he was first apprehended by police, the former tailor was accused of killing 13 people. However, he could only be formally charged of 9 because, and get this, 4 of his potential victims had been torn apart by real wolves. Even though, like his many other victims, these people entered the woods with Manuel and never saw the light of day again, their injuries could never have been inflicted by a human man. Wolf tracks left at the scene and the condition the remains were found in exonerated Manuel as a suspect in those cases. However, it's important to remember that this was a time when forensic pathology was in its infancy, so it's also totally possible that he killed them and then the wolves got hungry afterwards. Prosecutor Luciano Bastida Hernandez told the court how Manuel lured his female clients and their children out into the Spanish countryside only to butcher them, steal their clothes, and extract their body fat. One of the more disturbing facts of this case is that he would use the fat to create soaps which he would then sell at the local market stalls. His interesting and entrepreneurial ventures even earned him the nickname of the Tallow Man throughout Europe. Now, whether you believe that Manuel was cursed with the mark of the beast or not, you can't deny that he was an evil monster. Amongst his victims were 47-year-old Manuela Garcia and her daughter, 15-year-old Petra, 37-year-old Antonia Land and her daughter, Peregrina, 34-year-old Benita Garcia Blanco and her 10-year-old son, Francisco, Josefa Garcia and her 21-year-old son, Jose. Finally, there was 12-year-old Maria Dolores, who was travelling alone. Manuel was an insecure and twisted individual who used his non-threatening stature to lull his victims into a false sense of security. He gained their trust, then he brutalised these women in front of their own children. On the 6th of April 1853, Manuel Blanco Roma Santa was sentenced to death by garrote. And let me tell you, of all of the ways to go out, this is for sure one of the worst. He was also ordered to pay 1,000 reales in restitution to each of the victims' families. Finally, the so-called werewolf of Ayari was locked up, and you would hope that those who were impacted by his unspeakable crimes could now move forward. But tragically, that wasn't to be. Manuel's reputation carried far and wide, and for centuries the case was sensationalised, so much so that along the way those whose lives were taken have been completely forgotten. There is little to no information out there anymore regarding Manuel's 9 victims, and it goes to show that in the 171 years that have passed, the public's fascination with serial killers hasn't changed. The families and loved ones of the murdered travellers prayed that after the execution, public interest in the case would die down. However, again, they were bitterly disappointed. Only a year after Manuel's sentence was handed down, a French hypnotherapist contacted the Spanish Minister of Justice, begging for the execution to be pushed back so that he could formally assess Manuel and his mental state. He believed that the renowned serial killer was indeed suffering from lycanthropy psychosis. He advised that if Manuel truly believed that he was a wolf during the slayings, then he couldn't be held legally responsible for his actions. In a shock turn of events, a royal pardon was issued by Queen Isabella II, and Manuel's death sentence was commuted to life in prison. After this, he was then transferred to another prison where he allegedly died just weeks after he arrived. I say allegedly because there are many versions of events when it comes to Manuel's date of death and cause of death. Some reports said he passed away shortly after he was moved to Ceuta prison, and others claimed that he died almost 10 years later of stomach cancer on December 14th, 1863. There have been allegations of corruption, with many believing that Manuel was shot by a prison guard who was trying to goad him into transforming. The mystery surrounding his demise would only fuel the public hysteria, and to this day, Manuel Blanco Roma Santa remains one of the most prolific serial killers of the 19th century. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly where things went so wrong for Manuel, but I can't say I'm surprised that he would relate with the legend of the werewolf. He lived for 6 years as a little girl, only to be told one day that he wasn't allowed to be that anymore, and now he had to be something else. Growing up, Manuel was taught to suppress that other half of his personality, and I'm sure the line of communication between he and his parents was completely closed when it came to discussing his gender. So I can see why he felt angry, confused, and as though he had an inner beast bursting to get out. Of course, it will never excuse what he did to those women and their children. It takes a certain kind of evil to prey upon the most vulnerable, and whilst I'm positive there are beings out there that defy the laws of nature, I don't believe that Manuel was one of them. I think he created this Wolfman character to justify his own bizarre desires. And if he really was shot by a guard who was pushing him to turn, then it's a little bit of poetic justice that what ended his life was the fact that he really was the boy who cried wolf. I hope you found this week's episode informative. If you did, please smash those like and subscribe buttons. It really helps this wee channel of mine. If you're a fan of all things supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please check out our fact or fiction horror podcast, Here She Lies, now available over on Spotify. I'll pop a link in the description box below. I really hope you guys have enjoyed our little 3-part history mystery series. We will be moving on to a new series next week. It's called the Believe Me series. If you've watched this channel for a while, you will know that I'm a very strong advocate for women's rights, and these cases will touch on instances where women weren't believed and it led to perpetrators being released and committing further crimes. There will be a couple of tough episodes thrown in there, but don't worry, I'll always pop a trigger warning right at the start. I'm really looking forward to this series. I think it's an extremely important topic, especially right now. Violence against women is on the rise. So with that being said, I love you all so much. So please remember to lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and don't go into a weird man's house on the first date. Just saying. See ya! Big kisses.